West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
We've all been following very closely the question of whether or not voting rights will get federal protections this year. To that end, I want to draw your attention to something that just happened a short time ago tonight on the United States Senate floor.
Congress has a responsibility to act now to ensure that the right of every American to vote is never taken away. We must pass legislation to prevent partisan politicians from rejecting the will of the people and overturning election results. And because that effort here in Congress is being blocked by a minority which is abusing its power, I believe the time has come to change the Senate rules to allow a straight up or down majority vote on this fundamental issue of democracy. We must change the Senate rules to protect the right to vote, because if we don't, we face a very different kind of election day than the one we have now. If the partisans who are attacking our democracy have their way, our Tuesday election day in early November will be different. We'll wake up, cast our vote, drop our kids at school, go to work. We'll tune back in at the end of the day to see the election results, only to learn that the vote tally is being ignored, that our votes don't matter much. We'll learn that our legislatures are going to throw out the results and pick their own winner. We'll see an election day that is a charade, just like in countries where democracy doesn't exist. Our democracy is too important to allow a minority of this body to let it slip away. We must pass legislation to protect American democracy. Our country depends on it.
That was New Hampshire U.S. Senator Maggie Hassan tonight, urgently calling on her colleagues in the Senate to change the rules, to change the filibuster rules and allow a simple majority to pass voting rights protections. Now, this is really important in political terms. Senator Hassan is a moderate senator. She's got a very tough re-election fight ahead of her in New Hampshire. And this represents a shift for Senator Hassan. Up until now, she has not, she's supported voting rights, to be sure, but she has not supported a carve out from the filibuster for getting voting rights passed. Now, she says, given the urgency of this situation and the sort of dire straits that democracy is in without federal protection, now she supports getting voting rights protections passed with a straight up or down majority vote. And that really is the only way it can happen. Joining us now to talk about arriving at this new position is Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan from the great state of New Hampshire. Senator Hassan, it's a real pleasure to have you here tonight. Thank you for making time.
Rachel, thanks for having me on.
So I want to be clear, and I think I was a little woolly about this, the way that I described it before the commercial break a moment ago. In the past, you have said that the filibuster should maybe be changed. For example, we should maybe force people to talk through the filibuster all the way through, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, in order to apply a filibuster to something like voting rights. This speech that you gave tonight makes me think that you're calling for something new, that you are calling for essentially a carve-out from the filibuster so that voting rights can pass with just a simple majority vote. This is a shift for you, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because the foundational nature of voting rights is at stake. And part of what has really influenced me here is just seeing this acceleration of measures at the state level where they're working to take impartially administered elections and turning them into a partisan exercise. And if that happens, if we can't rely on our votes being counted and tallied, and our election officials caring not about who wins, but about making sure that the elections are just free and fair, then we really are seeing the crumbling of the very foundation of our democracy. And that's the foundation on which everything else is built.
That sort of anecdote, that sort of dystopian portrait that you laid out for your colleagues, talking about how the next election day might be one in which we learn after casting our votes that our votes are being disregarded. It does sound a little bit like science fiction facially, but the type of changes that you described in that part of your speech, those things have actually been proposed in numerous state legislatures already this year, not even a year out yet from last year's election resolution. Is there disbelief among your colleagues that things are this serious and that the proposals to change our elections are as radical as the ones that you described?
There is just kind of, I'm not sure disbelief is the right term, but real concern, and we've been talking about it among ourselves. And, you know, I think a lot right now about my dad. He was a World War II veteran. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And he and that greatest generation saved freedom for the rest of the world. They saw the threat, the reality of tyrants and authoritarianism up front and up close. And my dad, sometimes at the breakfast table with my sister and brother and I, would look at us and say, what are you all going to do for freedom today? And that sounds like kind of a serious, odd question to ask a kid, but my dad meant it. And he's been on my mind a lot recently. What are we going to do for freedom today? Because this all depends on having these impartially administered elections.
Senator, you are a practical and ideologically moderate Democrat. You are a get things done for your home state kind of senator, I know. You don't spend a lot of time on cable television, for example. I have to ask you, given your role in the Democratic caucus, your sort of workhorse, not show horse role, and the way that you are allied with your more moderate colleagues on a lot of issues, do you have any insight into whether they might be softening on this issue or opening their mind on this issue to potentially changing the filibuster rule in order to pass these protections, even if they had previously said they wouldn't do it? I'm thinking specifically of Senator Kyrsten Sinema, but I mean it about any of your other colleagues who might have previously been in a more cautious posture on this issue.
What I can tell you is that the seriousness of what we're seeing in states across the country is really weighing on people. From Georgia to Arkansas to Arizona, we are seeing these measures that are really aimed at allowing partisans to just work the levers of their power to really choose their own winners. And what we also know is when that happens, when voters don't have confidence that their input matters or that they can hold their elected representatives accountable, then the democracy really does begin to crumble. And people in power, as they get more and more distance and divorced from the people they represent because they aren't held accountable, begin to rely more and more on authoritarian methods. And so this is really serious. It's weighing on all of us. We know how important free, fair, impartially administrated elections are to our democracy, to our way of life. And frankly, too, how important it is when you think about who our enemies are. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they would love to see American democracy fail. This is about our security, stability, our economy, our individual rights at home, but it's also about our security around the world and about our standing. So it's weighing on all of us, and we're having ongoing discussions about it because it's so serious.
It is Friday, the 17th of December of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, Friday is upon us, and do we have to gird our loins for the weekend like we used to for every weekend with that guy? Well, it's bad enough. Mitch McConnell commented on the January 6th commission, it being something that, he might, it's interesting to him. Now, some pundits have speculated that maybe McConnell and the rest of the GOP are done with Trump, but I don't think Trump's done with the GOP. No, he's got about 71 million people who are willing, yes, to take up arms and tell people what they want, and if they don't get it, they're going to make you give it to them because they're tired. They're tired of living in the margins of society. And then you look at their boats that they are rich enough to sink at their maggot regattas. You got to have a lot of disposable income, one would think, to not only purchase this craft, but then to go out on the lakes, the rivers, the ocean, wherever, get swamped, and have your vessel sink. Because then you got to pay to have it, dragged back up by a salvage company, hopefully without too much damage. Oh my God. Well, they were living on the margins. They had economic anxiety. All those people out there are going to make sure they aren't able to buy their third or fourth yacht that they can sink on a whim. All right. Not to mention their maggot trucks and their McMansions. Very, very marginal types. Very. Life has just treated them so terribly. And look at all those people out there just taking. Not once do they ever look within themselves to see how much they've taken and how much they've given back. All right. And apparently we are the commies and the socialists. Well, we only look like commie and socialists to them, as I've mentioned before, because they are so far to the right that they call Nazis liberals. That's how far to the right you have to be. Plus, you got to be a little bit, twisted in the head, too. That's part of being a Nazi, is not being well. Because if you were well, the Icebox Baby gulags probably would have bothered you when they were happening on the front page. Lionized as some great thing that was being done by this great man who's finally told all those rapists and drug addicts no more. All right. Remember the Muslim ban? I mean, that was like within days of this guy taking over the United States of America with Russian help. People were kind of pissed. Remember the Women's March right after the inaugural? I don't remember anybody with pink pussy hats storming the Capitol saying, give me the vice president or give me whatever. Nobody did that. Nobody. Only one party was willing to violently attempt to overthrow the United States of America and then have the audacity to call themselves patriots. And we are the enemy. Oh, we're Antifa. Well, yeah, we're anti-fascist. That's supposed to be a bad thing? You got to be pretty much of a Nazi to think that anti-fascism is a bad thing. Oh no, you're the Nazi. You're the Nazi. You're trying to make me take a vaccine. Just like the Nazis did. The Nazis didn't force people to take a vaccine. Let's be clear. Weimar Republic did, but that's a different story. And anyway, health laws are there for a reason. They're public. You're protecting the public. Only these weird-ass Nazi libertarians, and, really libertarians, they're just temporarily embarrassed Nazis. Once they get over the embarrassment, they just go out there and start goose-stepping with the rest of them. I feel good. I'm goose-stepping now. Got a Trump judge deciding, and he sits on an appellate court. Jeez, these people pack the courts for decades, and then we get to Trump and look who he puts up there. I wish they were as competent as Roland Frieslander. Or is it Frieslander? The People's Court judge in Nazi Germany? The real People's Court? Yeah, when People's Court came out with Wapner, remember that guy? Way back in the day. I was thinking, Wapner? People's Court? Nazi Germany? What the hell is going on? Yeah, that's how they subtly dig it in there a little bit. Huh? Now you got 71 million people who are just willing to embrace Nazism. And they're willing to shout to high heaven that it's a good thing. They are the patriots. So we have this wacko Trump judge deciding a case about a high school student, a young girl, who did not want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So the principal, some coaches, a bunch of teachers just harassed and harangued this poor girl for years. Years. Made her the public butt of jokes. Questioned her patriotism. Questioned her nationality. Questioned her religion. Questioned whether she was a witch, questioned whether she was a Muslim, questioned this, questioned that, just because she did not want to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Which I should say the Supreme Court's already decided on that you can do that. But it didn't matter to this school. So she sued. And it's wended its way through this packed court judicial system. Decades they packed the courts. Decades. It's about time we balanced them. All right? Come on, Democrats. Stop being so polite. So we got this Trump judge questioning whether this girl has any rights. He called the First Amendment a dumpster fire. Why, the First Amendment's not settled law. This is a Trump judge. Packed on the courts, probably Federalist Society, endorsed at least. And nobody bats an eye. They are now purporting that the First Amendment is not settled law, but part of the Second Amendment is. Only part. Not the whole amendment, only part. No, these guys are Nazis. With quotation marks at least, okay? And it's about time we punched the Nazis. You got this Nazi, Marjorie Taylor Greene, calling people in the House communists. We got to get rid of these communists. And we're all nice and everything. And while we're being nice, they want to strike our comments from the public record because we insulted a colleague. And the insult was not there from our side. They want to purge all of us because of our commie tendencies. And yet, we're not attempting to purge them because I got to tell you, there should not be any Nazis in government. They should not be allowed to run. They should, if they're exposed as having Nazi tendencies, then, well, I don't know, put them through a 12-step program. Maybe there's some sort of methadone Nazi patch that they can wear to get over it, maybe. But they certainly can't be put in positions of power to decide upon what democracy and representative democracy is going to do, since their whole raison d'etre is to destroy democracy. There's no First Amendment right to that. If a young girl can't decide on her own, I am not going to give some sort of false fealty to a flag. My patriotism is not judged upon that act. Because I got to tell you, every single one of these electeds, plus all of these Federalist Society judges, took an oath to the Constitution that they seem to be breaking on a daily basis. They care nothing for an oath. So why would they be allowed to judge what a young girl is doing in terms of her high school and this forced patriotism that's being forced upon her? Spiro Agnew said way back in the day that this country is going to move so far to the right you won't recognize it. Do we? Do we recognize it? When it's in slow motion, I suppose, it seems like it's always been there. Well, you know what? It always has. The Nazis wouldn't have become Nazis if they hadn't studied American eugenics and our anti-Semitic movements, our slavery. So, yeah, it's always been there. The sentiment's always been there, but there's always been a third of the population, the caustic third. But somehow their numbers have not increased, and yet their influence has. And why? Are we too lazy to rub out the rust? We're just going to let it corrode until everything collapses? I think we need to get to work. Indeed. Well, it is Friday. Let's hoist those French 77s, shall we? Yes, we shall. And get into the curated part of the show, because that's how we center ourselves. At least some of us do. At the top, well, Senate Democrats are getting serious about protecting elections and voting rights. And I don't know. Maybe Joe Manchin will accept a carve-out exception for the filibuster. Still got to get Kristen on board. Jeez. Okay. On the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe as we start off here on this Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, the all-Republican Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled Ken Paxton cannot unilaterally prosecute election cases. Cannot. A Superior Court judge in Delaware rejected Fox News' motion to dismiss the defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems. And it looks like, Fox is, they're running. They're running scared. And the Federal Trade Commission voted unanimously on a rule that would prohibit impersonating government agencies or well-known companies in order to bilk Americans. God, I can't tell you how many car warranty calls my mom gets daily. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where vaccine skeptics in Eastern Europe are having a change of heart. Yeah, infections are spiking big time. And the seats in Germany's Bundestag will be rearranged after the new ruling party refused to sit next to the extreme far-right Alternative for Germany party. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, boy, I got to tell you, it really helps. Because we like to pay our bills. And we do. We not only like to, we do. And we are able to do it because of your help. And we've been doing this, paying our bills, which then allows us to fly under the radar and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. We've been doing this for almost 11 years now. 24/7, 365. That's right. Continuous broadcast resistance. And we take it as a civic duty, and we take our civic duty quite seriously. Longevity might be a clue. We have some dedication to the purpose now, don't we? And we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, oh, so many years ago. Anyway, thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and thank you, Tom, for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary. It will always be a diary, not a story. I post that diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get it posted up on Twitter and other social media networks, and you know who they are. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 etc. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Texas Tribune by Patrick Svitek. Texas's highest court for criminal cases struck down a law that allows the Attorney General to unilaterally prosecute election cases. The state's Court of Criminal Appeals issued an 8-1 opinion saying a provision of the law violates the Separation of Powers Clause in the Texas Constitution, representing an intrusion by the executive branch into the judicial. The Attorney General can only get involved in a case when asked to by a district or county attorney, the court said. Attorney General Ken Paxton, a Republican who has been aggressive in trying to root out voter fraud, bashed the opinion from the all-GOP court. He said in a tweet that the ruling could be devastating for future elections in Texas. You know, as they've already said publicly, if we Democrats are able to vote, they can't win. There's more of us. Because I guess we're all commie socialists who want free press, free speech, freedom of religion, freedom from religion, and the potholes filled up. At stake was a part of the election code that says the Attorney General, the state's top law enforcement officer, may prosecute a criminal offense prescribed by the election laws of this state. The provision was thrown into jeopardy by a long, winding case involving Jefferson County Sheriff Zena Stevens, after the county district attorney declined to prosecute Stevens over campaign finance allegations stemming from the 2016 election. Paxton's office stepped in and obtained an indictment from a grand jury in neighboring Chambers County. In its opinion, the Court of Criminal Appeals overturned a lower court ruling that said the election code provision clearly and unambiguously gives the Attorney General power to prosecute criminal laws prescribed by election laws generally, whether those laws are inside or outside the code. Rather, the Court of Criminal Appeals said the Attorney General can prosecute with the permission of the local prosecutor, but cannot initiate prosecution unilaterally. In his tweet, Paxton said the ruling means Soros-funded district authorities will have sole power to decide whether election fraud has occurred in Texas. That is a reference to George Soros, the Democratic mega donor who's become a force in local prosecutor elections, because he's Jewish. And let's just throw the Jew in there. The Jews are going to take over Texas. We got to have that. We'll all be celebrating Hanukkah. Hanukkah's over. This is a big win for, Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee cheered the ruling. Harris County, the largest in Texas, was the epicenter of election-related litigation in the lead-up to the 2020 election in Texas. This is a big win for local government and Texans who are tired of state officials exaggerating voter fraud claims to undermine elections. Reacting to the ruling, a Republican state representative, Briscoe Cain. This is like a little Trumpenjungen, Nazi-Jungen brat. This Briscoe Cain. God, this guy bugs me almost as much as Madison Cawthorn bugs me. Well, he said he would file a bill the next time the legislature convenes that would let prosecutors in neighboring counties go after election cases. If the attorney general can't and a county won't, then prosecutors from an adjacent county should be able to do it, the Deer Park lawmaker tweeted. Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A judge yesterday, Thursday, rejected a motion by Fox News to dismiss a $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit brought against the cable news giant by Dominion Voting Systems over claims about the 2020 presidential election. In the 52-page ruling, Delaware Superior Court Judge Eric Davis said that the voting machine company had shown that at this stage, it is reasonably conceivable that Dominion has a claim for defamation per se. Denver-based Dominion filed a lawsuit earlier this year against the media organization, alleging that some Fox News employees elevated false charges that Dominion had changed votes in the 2020 election through algorithms in its voting machines that had been created in Venezuela to rig elections for the late dictator Hugo Chavez. On-air personalities brought on Trump allies who spread the claims and then amplified those claims on Fox News' social media platforms. It is, what did they call it again here? A media organization. It is not news. It's a propaganda shop and should be treated accordingly. In this reporter's opinion, of course. There is no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. In fact, that a range of election officials across the country and even Trump's Attorney General William Barr confirmed. An Associated Press review of every potential case of voter fraud in the 6 battleground states disputed by Trump has found fewer than 475, a number that would have made no difference in the 2020 presidential election. And I want to tell you, of that 475, I bet you 472 voted for Trump multiple times for their dead wives, their dead moms, their dead husbands, their dead kids. The dead are voting because we're voting for them. God, these people. And I really mean it when I say these people. In denying the motion to dismiss the lawsuit, Davis said that Dominion's complaint supports the reasonable inference that Fox either knew its statements about Dominion's role in election fraud were false or had a high degree of awareness that the statements were false. Davis said that Fox possessed countervailing evidence of election fraud from the Department of Justice, election experts, and Dominion at the time it had been making its statements. The fact that, despite this evidence, Fox continued to publish its allegations against Dominion suggests Fox knew the allegations were probably false. The judge also wrote that despite emails from Dominion attempting to factually address Fox's fraud allegations, Fox and its news personnel continued to report Dominion's, quote, purported connection to the election fraud claims without also reporting on Dominion's emails, end quote. Given that Fox apparently refused to report contrary evidence, the complaint's allegations support the reasonable inference that Fox intended to keep Dominion's side of the story out of the narrative, the judge wrote. Fox News Media said in a statement that, as we have maintained, Fox News, along with every single news organization across the country, vigorously covered the breaking news surrounding the unprecedented 2020 election, providing full context of every story with in-depth reporting and clear-cut analysis. We remain committed to defending against this baseless lawsuit and its all-out assault on the First Amendment. Fox News had sought to have the lawsuit dismissed, arguing that its coverage is protected by the First Amendment and that a free press must be able to report both sides of a story involving claims that strike at the core of democracy. You know, they want the right to have one side of the story which is based on lies, subterfuge, and propaganda, and the other side is the truth. Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission voted unanimously yesterday, Thursday, to begin work on a rule that would prohibit scam artists from impersonating government agencies or well-known companies in order to bilk Americans. The 4 commissioners, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, voted to approve an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to ban this kind of impersonation. Impersonation fraud in general has skyrocketed during the pandemic, with impersonation fraudsters scamming Americans out of around $2 billion between October of last year and September of this year, an 85% increase year over year, FTC Chair Lena Khan said at the meeting. Scam artists who impersonate government agencies have sometimes threatened their victims with the loss of benefits or even arrest said the FTC, which identified the frauds as the largest source of total reported consumer financial losses. The rulemaking was prompted by a Supreme Court ruling that made it more difficult for the agency to recover money for victims of scams. The court said in April that the agency had overstepped its authority in its practice of seeking court orders to make fraudsters return money improperly obtained from consumers in the form of restitution or disgorgement. Well, that brings us to our break. Why don't we disgorge ourselves to this break? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, a care package. If you're the type of person who doesn't get musicals, I probably have to tell you who Jonathan Larson was. Jonathan Larson wrote Rent, wrote the cultural event that swirled around art, millennials, and AIDS that exploded in the 1990s. And because the universe does not care about us, Larson died of a cardiac malfunction before he even saw his show open. Now, before Rent, Larson wrote and performed a monologue with songs with just him, a piano, and a band, dealing with his anxiety about turning 30 before having achieved any professional success. He called it Tick, Tick, Boom. So after Rent, in mourning for the man who seemed to have been poised to become the future of musical theater, people reworked Tick, Tick, Boom into a 3-person, 3-act show, and what we have now is Lin-Manuel Miranda, musical theater's new savior, making his directorial debut with his film adaptation. So, 3 things about Miranda's Tick, Tick, Boom. 1, Miranda hits it out of the park. He understands that even though movies bathe in realism, movie musicals can't, because musicals themselves aren't realistic. So from jump, Miranda shows us from the editing style to moments of visual magic that we're watching a filmic construction. And speaking of editing, Tick, Tick, Boom has 2 great editors, Andrew Weissblum, until he had to go back to work with Darren Aronofsky, and Myron Kirstein, who edited In the Heights. And Miranda himself said that his skills as a composer, knowing tension and release, feeling when to slow down and when to move along, helped prepare him to work with those 2. 3, Andrew Garfield holds the center of this film with a stunningly expressive performance. I mean, he sells the songs, sells them as top-shelf goods. You're drawn to his John Larson. You root for his John Larson. You love his John Larson. Tick, Tick, Boom benefits from the collection of the right people. Miranda cares about Broadway, cares about musical theater, cares about Jonathan Larson, and thus helps us care about his story. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
As fall turns to winter, the flu season will be upon us in force. The best way to avoid influenza is to get immunized. Everyone 6 months and older should be vaccinated. Those at increased risk for flu complications include children under the age of 5 and adults 65 and older, people with chronic health problems such as heart disease, asthma, and diabetes, and pregnant women. To get your annual flu vaccine, see your healthcare provider or go to a pharmacy, grocery store, or clinic in your area. If you get influenza, talk with your healthcare provider right away about antiviral medication. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital signs.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Here's a twist on Christmas that would make Jesus weep. First, a right-wing faction in the U.S. has been wringing its hands over a hokey cultural crisis cooked up by the faction itself, namely that liberals, atheists, humanists, and, God forbid, Marxists are waging a war on Christmas. The infidels are not accused of lobbing bombs in this war, but words of mass destruction. Specifically, the right-wing purists wail that unholy lefties are perverting the season by saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. Second, some ultra-conservative members of this same faction have launched their own war against Jesus. How twisted is this? They say no one should mess with the word Christmas, yet they're messing with the guy Christmas is supposed to be about. Okay, technically they're not going directly at Jesus, but at a key part of his message, and in particular at a key messenger of Christianity, Pope Francis. They've decided that the Pope is a Marxist, pointing out that Francis speaks often about the, quote, structural causes of poverty, the idolatry of money, and the new tyranny of unfettered capitalism. Obviously, say the Pontiff's pious critics, that's commie talk. The clincher for them was when Francis wrote an official papal document in which he asked in outrage, how can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market loses 2 points? See, cried the carpers, that's proof that Francis is the Red Pope. But wait, that was a very good question he asked, one ripe with the moral wrath that Jesus himself frequently showed toward the callous rich and their love of money. Indeed, the Pope's words ring with deep ethics you find in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Was he a commie too? This is Jim Hightower saying, could it be that the carpers are actually the ones lacking in real Christmas spirit?
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Joint stock companies and royal proprietorships were Britain's tools for settling North America. Elizabeth I was hesitant to use state funding to establish colonies in America. A less risky way, as far as the crown was concerned, was to authorize joint stock companies. These were companies that wealthy individuals could buy shares in. The risk was therefore spread out among many people. The Virginia Company was one such joint stock company. King James I granted the Virginia Company a charter to make habitation, plantation, and to deduce a colony of sundry of our people into that part of America commonly called Virginia. The Virginia Company established the Jamestown Colony in Virginia in 1607. At first, the more than 100 British colonists searched for gold. They didn't find any. Instead, they encountered incredible hardship. The colonists battled malaria, disease, hunger, and cold winters. Many of them died. They occasionally fought with Native Americans of the Powhatan Confederacy, but also relied on them for food. The Virginia Company ultimately lost money and its charter. After this, Virginia became a British royal colony. the first in what would someday become the United States. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1944. That was the day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt rescinded Executive Order 9066. It had forcibly relocated over 120,000 Japanese Americans into internment camps. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the government considered Japanese Americans a national security threat. By 1942, many were given less than a week's notice to sell and store all property. Whole families were rounded up and taken away to desolate areas in the west and southwest of the United States. Up to this point, many Japanese Americans in California were employed in the agricultural industry, some as tenant farmers. They were responsible for 40% of all produce grown in that state, whose crops were valued at $40 million annually. Over 6,000 farms consisting of 200,000 acres were confiscated. Once interned, they were subjected to dire living conditions with little in the way of running water, sanitary facilities, or medical care. They were subject to forced labor in the construction of camp buildings and cultivation of near barren lands. The government hoped to make the camps self-sufficient. In Poston, Arizona, they were made to build the infrastructure for Colorado River Tribe's reservation in order to consolidate other tribes onto the land. When Japanese Americans were finally released, most found their stored belongings stolen and their homes, jobs, and farms confiscated and redistributed. After the war, they continued to face violence, job and housing shortages, and racial discrimination. Ronald Reagan would sign the Civil Liberties Act in 1988. It acknowledged that internment was based on, quote, race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. The act served as a formal apology and sought to distribute billions in reparations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Considerable cloudiness. Winds will be light and variable. Lows overnight in the low 30s. Winds light and variable with highs tomorrow. Highs today will be in the low 40s. Highs tomorrow in the mid 40s. And it looks like we won't be having any rain, though we did have some this morning. And it looks like we might have a little bit, but nothing measurable until Sunday, and then it will be dropping precipitously. The air quality index for the Rogue River region is good at 22 parts per million. Daytime UV index is low at level 1. And we're going to forego the other particulars for the local forecast. The coronavirus infections have not been updated. I don't think they're doing them daily anymore. I'm going to have to look into that. But weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 47 and cloudy. Paris is 48 and fair. Rome is 56 and sunny. Kyiv is 35 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 26 and clear. Hong Kong is 61 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 41 degrees and fair. Sydney, Australia is 70 and clear. San Francisco, California is 42 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 57 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Sabina Nixick of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Some former vaccine skeptics in Eastern Europe have shifted over to the other side. As coronavirus infections surge, countries are making it more difficult for the unvaccinated to travel abroad, and authorities battle against government distrust and vaccine disinformation. When she rolled up her sleeve in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo to take her first COVID-19 vaccine dose, Fada Keko was afraid of possible adverse side effects. But she said the worst she had to contend with over the next few days was moderately discomforting pain in her left arm around the site of the infection. More significantly, the 52-year-old self-employed cleaning woman has joined the global community of vaccine believers after months of being very susceptible to what she now describes as the most ridiculous theories. She told the AP that some of those she had heard were that the coronavirus does not exist, that journalists were paid to spread panic, that planes were spraying us with viruses at night, that vaccines were being used by the powers that be to implant us with tracking microchips. Now, I feel relief, she said. She is not alone in her transformation, especially after numerous European countries started tightening their antivirus rules, including by requiring proof of vaccination from foreign visitors. This week, health authorities in Sarajevo stepped up their efforts to administer COVID-19 vaccines as widely as possible, stymied so far by public mistrust and an onslaught of disinformation. They started dispatching nurses to dispense vaccines in local council offices and shopping centers around the city in hopes that easy access will persuade more people to get their shots. And the statistics are clear. People are now getting their shots.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The seats in Germany's parliament will have to be rearranged after lawmakers backed the wish of one party in the new coalition government not to sit next to the far-right Alternative for Germany. The seats in Germany's lower house, or Bundestag, are arranged in a semicircle, with the left party at one end and Alternative for Germany, or AfD, at the other. AfD first won seats in 2017. Before then, the pro-business Free Democrats had occupied that edge of the semicircle when they were represented in Parliament. The Free Democrats, who along with the left or center-left Social Democrats of Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the environmentalist Greens, are part of the new government that took office last week, said earlier this year they did not want to sit next to AfD's lawmakers anymore. The Bundestag backed a motion under which the Free Democrats will swap places with the center-right Union bloc of former Chancellor Merkel, which is now in opposition. The three governing parties and the left party, the smallest of the three opposition parties, backed the change. The Free Democrats will now sit next to the Greens, one of their governing partners. Well, good. And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.